Okay, so before adding or beginning adding our rational numbers, I want you to think back to our last slide, which was rules to adding integers. So this is the exact same for adding rational numbers. So when we have the same sign, I want you to think sum. So add the numbers together. And then give them the same sign. So whatever sign it previously had. So that's the first. The second would be if they have different signs. So one number would be positive and one number would be negative. When that's the case, I want you to think difference, aka subtraction. So think difference. And that is when you subtract the smaller number from the larger number. So subtract and that's not a hashtag, that means number. So subtract smaller number from larger number. And then give the sign of the larger number. So if the larger number is negative, then you're going to subtract the 2, and then the answer will be negative. If the larger number is positive, then you're going to subtract the 2 numbers from each other and give it a positive, the answer a positive sign. So, in this example, we have negative 3/4 plus a negative 9/4. As you can see here, they both have a negative sign. So they're both negative numbers. So because of that, we're going to use the same signs rule. So we're going to add the 2 numbers. So I want you to think absolute value here. So the absolute value of negative 3/4 plus the absolute value of negative 9/4. So the absolute value of negative 3/4 is just going to be positive 3/4 plus the absolute value of 9/4 is a positive 9/4. Since they both have the same denominator, we're allowed to add them. So 9 plus 3 would be 12, and then we keep the denominator when we add. So this can be reduced. So 4 goes into 12 3 times. But since both of our numbers were negative at the beginning, our answer is actually going to be a negative 3, not a positive 3. So you have to add them across like normal, and that's why we did the absolute value. But since both of our numbers were a negative number, we know, so we have our 2 negatives, we know that our final answer also has to be negative. Alright, so in the second example, you can see that our 5.1 is positive because it does not have a symbol in front of it. And then our 8.3 is negative. So since one is positive and one is negative, we are going to use our different signs. So that means the difference we're going to have to subtract. So we are going to do the absolute value of negative 8.3 minus the absolute value of 5.1. The reason I put negative 8.3 first is because it's a larger. So when we do subtract, we need to put the larger number first. And we're going to subtract the larger number from the smaller number. So the absolute value of negative 8.3 is just 8.3. And the absolute value of 5.1 is just 5.1. So I'm going to rewrite this so they're on top of each other. So 3 minus 1 would be 2, and 8 minus 5 would be 3. But since our bigger number, our larger number, was actually negative, our answer is going to be negative 3.2. So you have to always remember to go back and check your answer. Go back and check and make sure that you have your negatives where they're supposed to be. Because we always give the sign of the larger number. And our sign of our larger number was negative in this example. All right, for this example, I would like for you to pause the video and give it a try. As soon as you finish and you think that you have the answer, resume the video and double check your work. So go ahead and hit pause. All right, so this one wants you to add a negative 2.7 plus a 3.2. The first thing I would look at would be the signs. So always look at the signs. So if it helps, I want you to write steps. And number 1, look at the signs. Once you look at the signs, determine what rule are you going to use. Are you going to use the first rule, which was the same signs rule, or the second rule, which is the different signs rule? So determine the rule. And then I want you to add the rational numbers. When I say add, that could mean also to subtract, because if the signs are different, then you have to find the difference. All right, so in this example, we have negative 1.7 plus 3.2. So the signs are different. So I'm going to use the different signs. So that means that I have to subtract the smaller number from the larger number. So I'm going to take the absolute value of 3.2 minus the absolute value of negative 2.7. Now, I rewrote this because the larger absolute value needs to come first. You're subtracting the larger number from, or the smaller number from the larger number. So the absolute value of 3.2 is just 3.2. And the absolute value of 2.7 is just going to be 2.7. You're going to bring down your subtraction sign. So I rewrite it so they're stacked on top of each other. I find this easier when you're dealing with decimals. So 2 minus 7, we have to borrow from our 3, so that's now going to be a 2. That's now a 1. So now we have 12 minus 7, which is 5. and then we have 2 minus 2, which is 0. Now our larger number in this one would be our 3.2. That's a positive. So our answer is going to be positive. So our answer is just 0.5. So add over here on your steps to check your sign. All right. All right, so in this example, we have two rational numbers, but we cannot add them yet or begin doing anything because they do not have the same denominator. Also, I want you to make note that this extra long line is actually a -7/10. So please keep that in mind when you are doing your work. So in order to subtract the two, we have to make the denominators the same. So I'm going to use 20 goes into both, 10 goes into 20, and 4 also goes into 20. So in order to do that, I need to multiply the top and bottom. So I need the denominator to be 20. So like I said, we have to find a common denominator. So I know that 20 is the common denominator. So I have to first change it. So I have -7/10, and I need my denominator to equal 20. So 10 times 2 is 20. So to make my denominator 20, I did multiply it by 2. So I also have to do that to the top, because when I do the top, I also have to do to the bottom. So 7 times 2 is 14, and it's going to be a -14 because my 7 is negative. Then I have to take my 1/4, and I need my denominator to be 20. So 4 times what gives me 20? 4 times 5. So if I multiply the bottom by 5, I also have to multiply the top by 5. 1 times 5 is just 5. So now these are the two new numbers that I will use when trying to find my sum. So just like we did in our last example, we are going to take -14/20, and we're going to add that to 5/20. Now, if you notice, the signs are different. Since the signs are different, I'm going to have to subtract. So I'm going to have to use my subtraction. Oops. So that means I need to subtract my larger number from my smaller number. So my larger absolute value, so if I take the absolute value of -14/20 and the absolute value of my 5/20, I get 14/20, and I get a 5/20. So 14/20, this is my larger number. So it's large. And so obviously my 5/20 is my smaller number. So I'm going to subtract these two. My denominators are the same, so I'm going to keep 20. 14 minus 5 gives me 9. Oops. Gives me 9. But recall, we have to check our signs. 14/20 was not just a +14/20. It was a -14/20. Because of that, we have to take that sign. So our answer is negative 9/20. Now, if you have any questions throughout this video, I want you to write them down. You can write them down on a piece of paper, or you can write them down off to the side. But if you are confused, I need you to write them down, and that way you can ask me about it in class. All right, so let's go to our last problem. Our last problem has mixed numbers. Now, as you know, if we have a mixed number, we have to change it to a improper fraction. So to do that, we are going to, off to the side, we have negative 4/5/6. All right, so we're going to do 4 times 6, which is 24, plus 5, which is going to be 29. But our 4 was negative, so our sign is going to be negative. So next we had negative 2 5/9. So 9 times 2 is 18. And 18 plus 5 gives us 23. So we have 23/9. Now, our 2 is negative, so our sign is also going to be negative. In order to add, we have to have the same denominator. So the common denominator is going to be 18. So I need to make my denominator 18. So 9 times what gives me 18? That's 2. So that means I have to multiply the top by 2 as well. So negative 23 times 2 is going to give me a negative 46. Now, since I used 18 on the bottom one, I also have to have this denominator as 18 as well. So 6 times what gives me 18? 6 times 3. So that means I have to multiply the top by 3 as well. So 29 times 3, that's going to give me 87. It's going to be a negative 87 since my 29 was also negative. We're working with some big numbers here, but luckily, if you notice in our original problem, they both have the same signs. So that means we just get to add the two together and then just give them the same sign. So we have negative 87/18 plus negative 46/18. The absolute value of negative 87/18. And doing the absolute value helps you to actually add and not worry about those signs until the very end. So the absolute value of that is just 87/18 plus 46/18. Sorry, my 8s were a bit rough. So now we just need to add 87 plus 46. When you add those together, you get 133/18. Now, both of them were negative. So our answer is not a positive 133/18. It's a negative 133/18. This stuff is the stuff that I want to see on your work paper. I want to see each step, especially since we're dealing with negatives. It's a lot easier to forget a negative. So doing it in your head, you might end up dropping that negative when you should have kept it. So I want you to show your work similar to how I just showed you in the notes. You do have homework, and so that's going to be the 1.3 on digits.